Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Arizona Illustrated for Friday, the 14th of December, 2012. I'm Jim Ninsel, host of Political Roundtable, our weekly analysis and commentary on local, state, and national politics. Tonight, we'll talk about the impending school closures in the Tucson Unified School District and find out what's going on with the Tucson Convention Center. Joining me this evening is Pima County Democratic Party Chairman Jeff Rogers, Tucson Tea Party founder Trent Humphries, Tucson City Councilman Steve Kozachik, and Republican strategist Sam Stone. Thanks to all of you guys for being here. Let's start with TUSD, since that's been an issue we haven't had a chance to talk about very much lately. The administration is pushing for a discussion on whether or not to close a dozen or more schools here in the district, Jeff, and they're facing a, $17 million shortfall in the next year. What do you think is going to happen here with not only this discussion coming up, but also a new school board being sworn in right after the year begins?
Well, I'd like to see them pause for a moment here and kick this over to the new board. I mean, we're going to have two new members, and the makeup's going to change rather dramatically when it comes to some issues, particularly Mexican-American Studies program. And I think it would be sensible to have the people who are going to have to implement the closures be the ones who make the decisions. As it stands now, certainly we're going to have to close some of these schools, but the decisions on which ones is a very delicate matter. And it kind of seems like they have some of them on the chopping block that maybe should not be on them. Councilman Kozachik has a newsletter out this week that pointed out that Sewell School is 100% full and a B-rated school, and he also mentioned some things in his newsletter about support services, which kind of echoes a letter to the editor that appeared in the Star yesterday based on an Auditor General's report of TUSD that seems to suggest that they're spending, some, large amount of money, at least $9 million more than other districts are perhaps on middle-level management or other kinds of support services that maybe could go either into the classroom or go to close these deficits. So there's other things to look at, and I think that in addition to the school closures and these other issues, they really ought to be left over to the new board who's going to be sworn in just a couple of weeks.
And Steve, what about that? You have been vocal about this.
Yeah, I agree with what Jeff said. The number is, there are several numbers. The one he's referring to is that the TUSD spends $180 per student more than comparable districts statewide. The Auditor General just put that out, and that is about $9 million left laying on the table. In addition to that, though, they're saying they can save $5 million by closing the schools that are on the chopping block right now. That's 2% of their operating O&M budget. There's a $277 million they've got for O&M. $98 million of that goes straight to support services. That's money that's not going towards the schools. So if you really want to find 2% of your operating and maintenance budget, you can look at that $98 million and find that. And I would encourage the board and the administration, go pick a bunch of parents and teachers, frontline workers, and put that $98 million that's going to support services in front of them and say, find us 2% of that, and I'll bet you a dime to a dollar that they'll find it.
Trent, your thoughts? This is obviously teachers and students are very upset.
I actually have a relative that works in one of the schools that's going to be closed down, and it's a good school. And I think that, Michael Hicks made the point, says that we need to open up the transparency and find out why these schools are selected and what the criteria was. I think that has to happen. That absolutely has to be part of it, for just for the parents' sake. Why is my school getting closed down and that one not? We need to have the complete and open transparency. And if that happens with this board or the next board, that has to take place. And again, the reality of the situation is we're down 13,000 students over the last few years in TUSD. I mean, changes are going to have to be made, and you're not going to have as much money available as it used to be available. That's just the reality of the situation is. But I think that as long as the process, we take the politics out of it, which is almost impossible. Let's be honest. But if you get the transparency involved and say, well, these schools are low performing, these kids need a shot, they need an opportunity. Let's get them into a school where they can learn more. I think that people would be more on board with that than kind of the hinky way that it's went to this point.
Well, and one of the other things that you look at is when you close one of these schools and you don't reopen it as something very soon, you really can create a blighted area of that neighborhood. And we need to think very carefully about how they handle these properties, because that kind of blight can really do a lot of harm to a neighborhood if you don't think it through.
And in fact, that's what's going on right now. We've got schools all over the city right now that have been closed. I'll give you two quick examples. Wrightstown has been closed for 2 years. there's an offer on the table for a $1 million to $1.6 million high-end apartment complex to go in there. It would require some rezoning, but it's something that's just sitting there waiting for the district and the city, quite frankly, to act on. Rogers School, I'm going to hold a neighborhood meeting next week with a group who wants to open a niche charter school that would not compete from a curriculum standpoint with the rest of the district. And for the district board and administration, quite frankly, to just reactively say we're not going charter is just closed-minded, because there are some that don't conflict and don't compete. Jeff's right. The schools that are closed right now are creating a blight on the community. They're crime magnets. The district is not doing a good job of upkeep and maintenance on them, and I'm not claiming any high ground on that, because the city's doing a poor job on several of the properties that we purchased around the city. So this isn't just throw the district under the bus. But the fact of the matter is, once you close a school, it's not free money. You've still got to put money into to keep it up.
Sam, your thoughts on, we are seeing students leave, but at the same time, I've been to some of these meetings, and the parents and the teachers and the kids are all heartbroken to see their schools closing down.
Obviously, that's a really tough thing for a child or a family if they have a school in their area that they're comfortable with, that they're seeing close. Obviously, that's going to create some emotion in the community. But my view, and I think all the gentlemen here made good points on this, is we should be looking at this not as some sort of punishment on our school system, but as an opportunity. We need to take this chance we have all these open seats. We have this money that maybe needs to be spent in the classroom instead of on some of the middle management and things like that. Let's really take a look at how we can make TUSD a first-class school district. Use this and say, okay, there are going to be some closures. Maybe it's an opportunity to invest in some charter schools around the city in niche areas that can serve the community more effectively. And then let's look at how we allocate our classroom funding, because statewide, we have 55,000 administrators and only about 44,000 teachers in our school districts. And that problem is exacerbated in TUSD. So let's turn this around. Let's get the money back in the classroom. Let's focus on the kids and the community and say, hey, we can create, if we're going to close down a dozen schools, let's take that opportunity to make a dozen other schools some of the best schools in the country for these students. And let's really up the ante. And you look at what New Orleans did in the wake of Katrina. With one of the worst school systems in the entire nation, totally transformed by going to the charter school model and really investing in some new ideas, and we need to do that here.
There are 2 points tying onto that. Sam makes a reference to the charters. The district can also run charters, and it would increase their per student funding as well, so that's something they ought to look into. He also mentioned the state. The legislature is going to have a new cast of characters up there as well. And so from the standpoint of reprioritizing, there may be some new dollars that can come into the district. And I would much rather storm that beach arm in arm with the district than to simply capitulate and use the community as collateral damage.
And while we're talking about TUSD, we also have the whole question of the desegregation lawsuit and the Mexican American Studies program. And Jeff, there's a complicated legal struggle going on here, and there was a strange vote at TUSD this week where they thought they did one thing and they may have done another, and I don't really want to get in the weeds on that, but I do want to say, does it look as though there could be a federal order here that restores the Mexican American Studies program, and if so, are we looking at a conflict with the state law if that goes through?
We are, but the federal law will take precedence. I mean, if the DSEG order comes down and the unitary plan says that you must put these culturally relevant courses in place, then the school district will be ordered to do that, and Tom Horn, is not going to have anything to say about it. He thinks he is, but right now he's placed an objection in of the culturally relevant courses, as well as have originally TUSD objected to that or part of the order in the unitary plan, but the other night they voted to not object to that by a 3-2 vote, then went into executive session for legal advice and came out and voted 5-0 to not put an objection in. But then we hear the next day that they're saying, well, but the previous objection still stands. This is another good reason why we need to wait until these two new people are on board, because they're clearly in favor of reinstituting some kind of Mexican American Studies program. They will vote, together with Adelita Grijalva, and probably in a 3-2 vote to remove any objection whatsoever to these culturally relevant courses.
And Sam, there's the proponents of this program have said that it motivates students in a way that other courses have not motivated them. That the kids have different things that motivate them in high school, and a lot of high school students are bored. And
most of what motivated me in high school doesn't so much now. But I think this is something. Anytime you have an opportunity to engage kids and get them really excited about a subject, I think that's a great opportunity. The problem we had with the program, I think, was really with the leadership and the people deciding the curriculum and running the program. I think an intelligently formed Mexican-American studies program could be valuable, but the one thing that we kept seeing is the choice of curriculum. You're dealing with students who maybe haven't achieved, especially when they're freshmen and sophomores in high school, haven't gotten to the point that they can analyze for themselves the material they're being presented. That's something that is a skill that people develop over time, and that's a big part of what college is all about. And so it's too easy for them to fall in line and say, this is what I'm being told, this is right. And some of what they're being told in those courses was just absolutely nonsense. I mean, fiction in terms of Aztlan and some fictional land that existed here in southern Arizona. I hate to break this to all those folks, but white people and Spanish-speaking people moved here about the same time, and everyone killed the natives who were here. So nobody has a claim on this area that supersedes anyone else's, except if you're a Pasquayaki or a native tribe member here. So, a lot of that was just silly. And on top of that, it was dangerous because a lot of what was being presented was a very anti-American, frankly, anti-white kind of program. And if this is done in an intelligent way, it's valuable. But when it's doing that kind of thing and creating hostility and animosity in this community, it's just not something we need.
Steve.
I have never sat in the courses, nor have I read their textbooks, so I really can't speak to the content. The burden shifts to the people who are putting the curriculum together to comply with the consent decree. The wording in the consent decree is pretty clear, though, and this is why what the administration did a couple of nights ago is curious. It says, by the beginning of the 2013-14 school year, the district shall develop and implement culturally relevant courses and instruction designed to reflect the history, experiences, and culture of African American and Latino communities. The core curriculum described in this section shall be offered commencing the fall term of 13-14. So this isn't something they've got an option to do. Now, to the extent that they may need to retool some of the content, that's something that burden shifts over to the people who are putting those courses together. But it's not an option for them to just ignore this the way that they did in their vote.
No, and the other thing, we got to remember, I mean, let's go back and tell the true history of this. These programs were truly not really controversial until Dolores Huerta in 2006 made a speech at Tucson High School saying Republicans hate Latinos. That started a firestorm within the Republican Party, and with Tom Horn and John Huppenthal, that brought us to where we are now. And that's the true history of how this happened. Had that probably not happened, or then the reaction by then, we wouldn't be here talking about this.
I think the bigger outrage of this whole thing is if you go back, and I heard Ruben Salter explain this. I heard you talk about it. Look, we're 40 years into this. That thing has been around longer than I've been alive, this lawsuit, and we've spent $1.6 billion for almost no effect. That is a tragedy. That's even worse than Rio Nuevo. And the fact is that nobody talks about that. Where's this money went? What's happened to all this money? And the people in charge of spending that money and getting a different outcome, we've done nothing. And that's a huge tragedy. And I think that before we move on and go and start doing our new Christmas list of things we want to see, let's take a step back and say, well, how did we spend 40 years doing nothing with no outcome? I think if we get that answer, it might solve some of the other issues we have at TUSD with the spending, the culture, the closing the schools, why people are leaving that district. I think it's all part of one thing. And there's good people that work in that district. And yet, some of the biggest financial crimes in this state happened there also. We need to find out what happened, why it happened, and make sure that doesn't happen again with the new version. Is it going to go on 40 more years? How do we know?
I'll give you a partial answer as to where some of the money went into a huge bureaucracy to manage the DSEG program. They've got a $60 million budget to operate the DSEG. 40 of those $60 million are in that same support services and not in the classrooms. That is a tragedy.
How did that happen?
That's how bureaucracies self-feed on themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Well, speaking of bureaucracies,
Administrators make more than teachers. I mean, that's what it comes down to. If you're a teacher, No,
Right.
but those are, those are the opportunities we've been given, and we keep giving them out, and people take them and move up and establish a bigger bureaucracy around them, because every bureaucrat knows the more people you got working for you, the more job security you
Well,
got.
when you've got 2/3 of your $60 million in support services and departments and not in the classroom, that's a red flag that there's a problem going on.
1.6 billion with a B.
Okay, as long as we're talking about bureaucracies, the Arizona Republic reported earlier this week about some problems with the CPS cuts. Now CPS appears to be violating some visitation between parents and the children they've been separated from for whatever reason, and we're seeing a record number of kids in foster care. This is something you've talked about on the show before, Steve.
Yeah, I think CPS needs to perhaps look at a different model. It's not just intuitive that reunification is always in the best interest of the kid. When you've got drug abuse, neglect, and just generally abusive situations, the end goal doesn't necessarily need to be reunify the kid in that abusive situation. And so they could probably just retool their whole model and find a way to save a ton of cash. Now, to the extent that kids are the collateral damage in this thing is really unfortunate. I think the legislature needs to do a better job of oversight of that agency.
And what about the funding question?
I
along
read
with
the article,
oversight?
basically, and it was some sloppy reporting by the Republic, I'll give it that. What happened is that they were budgeted a certain amount of money to operate this year. And that was agreed upon by all the people when we first started the year. Now they're coming back and say, the money that we got isn't enough. We've overspent our budget. Okay, I get that. And in fact, in one of the emails, that's what it states. It says, due to a number of factors, we've already used up all the money in our budget. Now, the next question should be on the reporter. Well, what are those factors? Is there more children in the program? Are we having? Have costs went up? And if so, why? But those questions were never asked, and those questions need to be asked because look, they're budgeted the money. The money has not been taken from them. The money is they got all the money they were budgeted for the entire year. Now that might not have been enough money, but that's the question needs to be asked. Why wasn't that enough money? Is there more kids in the system? What's happening? And that was never asked by the reporter, and certainly not asked by anybody talking about the issue right now. So if you're given your budget money for the year, you came up with that budget. There's some responsibility on your end to say, well, we really misread this and say those things. But those things aren't being said. So I would suspect that they're not obvious things of why that they went over budget. Like Steve said, maybe we need to relook at the model.
Well, you got to realize that there are constitutional issues here. When you take children from their parents and terminate their parental rights, that's a huge deal. I mean, that's right up there with sending people to prison and taking their property, so you've got huge legal obligations there to people and constitutional rights at stake. And they don't live only by a model of let's reunify the family. That is an overarching goal, but a huge number and a huge percentage of these cases, they do not get unified. They end up in foster care, and they end up getting adopted, or they end up in a different family member's custody, and the rights of the parents are terminated. I'm a little bit with Trent here on this. I'm kind of wondering when I read the article about it, I said, well, how did this just happen all of a sudden? It was like, didn't we have any warning? Didn't we have some clue? Wait a minute here, this isn't going well. We're halfway into the fiscal year and we're running out of money already. And maybe he's right. Maybe we didn't allocate enough money to the program. But this sounds to me like something that needs to be addressed immediately by the governor and by the legislature, like the first day of the session. And we should be having some committees looking at it right now so that they hit the ground with some kind of a solution. Maybe some heads need to roll, but we shouldn't punish children, particularly children in these kinds of situations, for the failings of our legislature or the failings of CPS or other leaders. I mean, these children are very, very vulnerable. And many of them are in such a situation where they should not be taken from the home, and they're wrongfully taken from the home. Many others, probably the majority of them, are taken from the home, and then there are a huge number that just get overlooked. And then we get, then there tends to be a story about a child in Marana who died. Oh, look, CPS was in that home 8 or 9 times last year, and they didn't do the right thing and didn't get him out of the home. Well, are we going to see a whole lot more of these because of our failures? So I think the legislature needs to jump right on this.
Yep.
Well, Jim, I have to give you a nod here because I've been interviewed a few times by your journalism students here at the U of A, and they do a much better job than most of these reporters, including, unfortunately, the one who wrote this article for the Republic, because the follow-up questions weren't there. One note in the article said we've seen a 25% increase in the number of children in foster homes and needing to go into foster homes this year. Well, 25% year over year? why? And that should be the first question we have to ask. What led to this massive increase as opposed to last year, the year before? We've been in a recession for 5-6 years. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered by CPS, and absolutely, we need to get some people on this right away at the state legislature and in the governor's office, and it needs to be looked at from the bottom up and top down. And you know, if there is money that's being wasted or misallocated, let's get that fixed. And if there's a massive underestimation of the needs of the system, then let's have that come out and have a real discussion about what kind of funding level is appropriate.
Okay. And quite frankly, like I say, the word cuts is not accurate. I mean, they've got all the money that was allocated to them. Now, if it's not enough, obviously, and if this is a ploy to use children to get more money for things that are frivolous, then whoever who's litigating this through the press, they need to be let go. Quite frankly.
All right. Steve, I wanted to talk about Rio Nuevo and downtown redevelopment. The Rio Nuevo board seems to be getting ready to do some work finally on the Tucson Convention Center and some other areas behind it. Your thoughts on where this is going?
We will have in front of us a draft proposed settlement agreement on Tuesday. We'll go through it in executive session. I'm hopeful. We have some good things happening downtown now. We have at 1 East Broadway, we have a $18 to $20 million mixed-use development going on. We have the east end of downtown a proposed 130-room boutique hotel, mid-range prices, 6 to 8 restaurants on the Rialto block. If we can get the Rio Nuevo agreement finalized, then some TIF money from that block would go back into the operations of the Rialto Theater. So there are a lot of good things that are happening from a momentum standpoint. We just have to see the terms of the deal, and I'm hopeful that we can finally put this thing to bed, because quite frankly, the community legitimately has Rio Nuevo fatigue, and we just need to make sure that find a way to move this relationship forward.
Sam, should the Rio Nuevo board be investing in repairs in the TCC?
Well, if there's any money left in that fund, then that is the absolute best place we could spend it, and probably it's where we should have been spending the bulk of the Rio Nuevo money right from the start is replacing the TCC, but we missed that boat. So, if there is funds left available, then absolutely, that's a critical need right now. The facility is half a step from being worthless at this point because it's so run down.
Well, actually, I missed that point. You're right. There are, from the 2008 bonds, there are about $4 to $4.5 million left that were earmarked for the TCC out of those bonds. That's all they can spend that on. Statutorily, they're bound to three things. Number one is debt service. Number two is existing contractual obligations, and number three is until you issue a notice to proceed on a hotel and convention center, that's all you can spend it on. So putting the money into the TCC statutorily is where those dollars need to go.
And you have some management issues at the TCC too, in terms of actually some double booking and some issues that were going on with that. And your thoughts on just the future of the management of the facility, and can you make it a successful facility?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. Number one, high marks to Dick Miranda for getting his arms around the problems that were down there. I work in event management at some level, and there's no excuse for double booking major events. I mean, that's just looking at a calendar and erasing what's there and writing contracts and putting someone new in. As far as the TCC goes, I would expand it to Leo Rich, the Music Hall, and possibly the Temple of Music and Arts. Let's find a new model for that also. We talked about CPS. Here's another dysfunctional bureaucracy, though. If we can find a way to privatize and outsource the management of those other three, the Leo Rich, the Music Hall, and the Temple of Music and Arts, put somebody in charge of who has a vested interest in seeing them make a profit, as opposed to somebody who really, it's not their job and it's not their skill set. I pull those three aside from the arena because arena management is something fundamentally different than smaller venues like that. But there are ways, and there are companies who do this around the country. So let's get an RFP out on the street and let's find somebody who might be interested in making something good from a profit standpoint out of those venues, and get the city out of this whole event management process.
Do we have a problem though with doing that in terms of the union contracts and obligations we have with the employees there?
No, we can do it.
And just the last thing is, $4.5 million is not going to make a dent in the TCC. Just the hotel connection thing that has the extruding rebar out there costs $10 million. Just for and I don't want to beat the dead horse obviously, but that bonding level was at $80 million, and all that's left that we can actually tangible is 4.3 to go into. And it's just a continuing tragedy.
We would have had more to spend on that if the prior board, the Jody Bain board, hadn't let those bonds lapse. Now we're kind of skirting around bond law, and Jeff will know more about this than me for sure, but we've been told by the bond advisors that you can still put some of that money back into the TCC, but I was yelling 2 years ago, spend the bond money on what we got it on, and they kept saying, well, we don't even think it's there. Well, now we know it's there, and it should have been spent on that.
We're rapidly running out of time. I wanted to mention this whole question of whether Raul Grijalva is going to get appointed to the Interior Department. Jeff, a conservation group this week, was urging President Obama, should the Department of the Interior, the Secretary of the Interior post open up, that Raul Grijalva would be ideal for this.
Well, I think Raul has strong backers in the environmental community nationwide. But he has said he's not interested in a change of career. His office management has said that they haven't been approached about it. The president hasn't said that any kind of offer is pending there. So I'm guessing that's not going to happen. I don't know whether Flake and, there's some differences between Flake and McCain and Grijalva on a lot of mining issues in the state of Arizona. So, even with his own state senators, he might have some difficulty in the Senate.
So, Sam, we may not have another special election here.
I don't think we will. I don't expect him to take that offer. I mean, certainly if you're an extremist environmentalist group, Raul Grijalva is your idea of a wet dream for that position. I mean, he's perfect because he's against any sort of development whatsoever.
Well, I don't think that's true at all.
I think he would be an ideal choice from that perspective, but it's highly unlikely he would get confirmed by the Senate. I mean, he is way to the left, even of most of his colleagues in the Democrat House. So. Highly unlikely, and fortunately, no, I don't think we're going to have another special election. I think we've had enough.
All right. And Jeff, Pima County Board of Supervisors this week voted to spend $4 million to purchase more than 600 acres for a future park. We only have about 20 seconds left, but
I didn't know
idea.
that was in the works. But the northwest side is particularly low in parks and recreation opportunities for our citizens out there. So I'd like to learn a heck of a lot more about that before I have any kind of an opinion about it, because I just discovered it this week when like the rest of you.
All right.
We should all be fearful of these open-ended promises.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. It's all the time we have tonight, but you can learn more about what's happening in politics by visiting azpm.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts about tonight's program, so be sure to leave us a comment while you're on our website. And to find out more from AZPM, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Stay tuned next for the News Hour, and then at 8:30, tune into Arizona Week for a look ahead at the upcoming legislative session. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.